And that is that 70.3 training is the basis for everything. We can essentially, with that style of training, we can go off and we can do a number of different things with it, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big statement, and we're definitely not trying to be controversial here. They come into the sport and they're really, really looking for maximum life experience, being fit, for the whole of life. And I think that, the training of swim, bike, run, and the strength and conditioning, and maybe the nutritional component, is even the psychological component of maybe doing hard things as well. Welcome back to the podcast, guys. Just the two of us this week after 3 weeks with some brilliant guests. We had Rose from Podium. Cam Main was a great speaker talking about training. And then a podcast we had a lot of great feedback on with Scott Tyndall, all on nutrition. So, yeah, just us two to entertain you this week. But we've got a conversation that we think really probably reflects an enormous percentage of the endurance sports market right now.
It's something that we speak about quite regularly, to be fair, over the past couple of years. And I know you're a big proponent of it, Phil, and equally as am I. And that is that 70.3 training is the basis for everything. We can essentially, with that style of training, we can go off and we can do a number of different things with it, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big statement, and we're definitely not trying to be controversial here. We're just being like incredibly practical, looking at the majority of people in triathlon, speaking from our own experience, and my own experience, I was very much 70.3 athlete for most of my triathlon career, getting into it in my late 20s. And I was very able, through always training as a 70.3 athlete, to turn my hand to anything quite quickly. Whether that be some ultra running, whether it be a gravel race, whether it be some bike racing, some road racing, want to do, standalone run races. And I think the reason we talk about this more now is that we certainly see it with a lot of the people we coach. Um, they come into the sport and they're really, really looking for maximum life experience, being fit, for the whole of life. And I think that, the training of swim, bike, run, and the strength and conditioning, and maybe the nutritional component, is even the psychological component of maybe doing hard things as well, all aligns very well to allow you to flex in a lot of different directions. And I think, look, let's be clear from the start. If you want to be, the best, not the best version of yourself, the best, then, you probably need to be very, very specific to what you're doing, especially these days with the standard in each, in individual sports. And maybe maybe using you at one end of the scale here, Grant, like as you were chasing being one of the best triathletes in the world, how much scope would you have had for doing things that were out of the sphere of the specificity of sprint and Olympic distance triathlon?
That's an interesting question and something I was reflecting on a little bit recently, actually, and definitely the ability to do it. And quite often in an off season, one of the beauties, and I've spoken about it many times, that triathlon offers is it gives you the ability to do cool stuff. And for me, that was doing cool stuff outside. I enjoyed, going up into the mountains and just getting off the beaten track. And when that off season came around, and there was a couple of weeks, you were definitely able to do that kind of stuff, that kind of endurance esque stuff that I certainly enjoyed. During the season, however, all of these things were definitely a detractor. You running in the mountains, I use that as an example, is definitely going to take away from your threshold bike session the next day to some extent, and so it wasn't necessarily a brilliant idea. You're kind of riding a tightrope. You're right on the line of what your body can kind of handle, and therefore it needs to be as specific as possible because you're trying to get everything out of every one little moment. I got an interesting example of where that kind of specificity, I guess, can fall apart, and perhaps why the majority of people shouldn't be so specific. And that was, I remember one end of season, there was a group of us that we had a break for about a week, and our coach wanted us to do something fun. And so we went and played squash. Now, I'm sure you can imagine a group of, I think, five or
I've
six,
been exactly here. I know what you're going to say. Carry on.
five or six highly competitive endurance
Yeah,
sports athletes that can go for a long, long time. We played really, really hard for a good 2 or 3 hours, and I kid you not, for a week after I couldn't walk.
yeah,
My legs were in pieces, and that was 2 weeks after competing at the World Champs. I was incredibly fit, but not able to do other things in a slight tangent to the thing that I was training very, very specifically for.
yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think where we're going to go today is nearly whilst you were chasing being one of the best in the world, there has to be these things have to be considered that they're not good for you. You know, your profession, your job. Yes, okay, maybe just in the off season, it's okay to not be able to walk for a couple of weeks. You can't be doing that in the middle of the season. And it's actually like you said, you're so specific all year. The body isn't used to moving in different ways and doing different things, and therefore it pays a penalty. But everybody sits somewhere on this, you know, continuum, if you like, of like how specific they need to be versus what they're trying to get out of the sport. And I think what we're going to try and sort of cover off today is, um, why for an awful lot of athletes being a little bit less specific, but utilizing triathlon as the center of the training process probably works very, very well for people. So if we just dip back to like the current market, how do we sort of like see the market now versus 10 or 15 years ago? I know we talk an awful lot about a lot of our athletes wanting to do different things.
Yeah, I think it's in a really cool place actually. If we look 10, 15 years ago, um, listen, I remember, and I'm sure you were the same, Phil. You get on your bike for the first time. Where do you go? You look around, and there's probably a local cycling club that you go, and it's a bunch of at the time, there was a bunch of old men that you went
Yeah,
out on the
that's
bike
very much
with.
it's very much how I grew up. I mean, maybe not 10 or 15 years ago, a bit longer than that, maybe 25 years ago. But that was cycling back then, wasn't it? It was the local cafe. You basically went and did what the old guys told you to do. And we are talking old. Some of these guys were in fact, I remember Chris Boardman's dad was actually one of the main um, guys at our local cafe, Keith, actually, and he these guys, like even in my 20s, you think, oh God, you think everyone's old when you're 20, don't you? But actually, they were in the 60s and 70s, and but they very much led the scene back then, didn't they? And I think things have changed dramatically since then.
100%. And they showed you the ropes, and you get an absolute rollicking if you stepped out of line once. Um, but that's exactly the point. Sport in general has moved on. From those days where you learned how to do things off of those that had kind of gone prior, they had paved the way. It was a very small knowledge base. They were very knowledgeable, but it was a very small and narrow knowledge base. The world has opened up so much when it comes to endurance sport. I mean, love it or loathe it, social media has been instrumental to showing people what's possible, what we can do. And with that, there's a bunch of endurance sports that have kind of cropped up, and people get people excited to do the thing that we all love.
I think this is one of the best things about this is where social media is brilliant. It shows you what's out there. If you forget sport for a minute, but travel, for example, I follow a lot of travel things, and it shows you places you want to go, places you might not heard of, places you might, I was reading something about like some train journey around Transylvania the other day that sounded dead interesting. You would never think like that, and it's so sport is exactly the same, isn't it? You don't just come up with what's next yourself. You're being influenced from somewhere. These days, social media is a big part of that, and I think people step into the endurance world and very quickly now are exposed to all the options. And I think I was talking to some other coaches actually in other coaching businesses the other week, and we were very much this came up. This nearly, if you like, transient nature between endurance sports. It's great. People are, they all relate, and they all they're all, I mean, massively adding to people's life experiences, under the bracket of do cool shit, I guess. But yeah, it's definitely becoming much easier to, even within one sport, to be exposed to all the races out there, to see what they look like, to and make better decisions. So yeah, I think social media plays a very good role in this.
Is something that just cropped up in my mind there. Is training or becoming a 70.3 athlete, training for a 70.3, are they the ultimate hybrid athletes?
I reckon we come up with the titles for these podcasts in the podcast. I think you've just done it there, haven't you? Yeah, look,
That'll be very quick.
my experience tells me, yeah, probably. And why? Because, you know, why are we choosing 70.3? I think it offers a blend of sort of the right amount of endurance, big aerobic base, muscular endurance, you know, um, the strength component required, the psychology required in a race of that distance, and yeah, the individual components of how you train for it offer so much to the body. So yeah, I'm gonna go yes. I agree.
I think, and this is where it perhaps gets interesting, because to be a good 70.3 athlete, I'm going to say no. Um, but to train, I think the way that we try and get our athletes to train for a 70.3, which is in a slightly less, it's in a specific way, but there are other attributes in the mix. And where I'm going with this is strength training. Do you need to do strength training to be a really, really good 70.3 athlete? I would argue no. Do you need to do it to have longevity in the sport for a long time and for a whole myriad of health benefits? Definitely yes. And therefore, with adding that in to the aerobic benefits, to the muscular endurance, to the mentality of this long enduring event with a little bit of speed. Don't forget 70.3, we are still moving with a modicum of pace. Then it becomes, I think, then we become very, very good hybrid athletes.
Yeah, look, I think if your general intent is to mix things up, I think you accept lower performance peak across the board, if you like. If you want to reach your maximum potential, specificity is probably more key. But I sort of go back even maybe 10 years into the period where I was all in. I really was trying to be the best age grouper I could be, and I still would find time within, maybe not every season, but certainly within some years where I would have, I'd be going on holiday and there'd be I remember specifically going to New Zealand, and we couldn't. It was actually quite good. I couldn't do the great walks, which are like 4 day walks around sort of the south. Well, they're around the island, but there's a few concentrated down in the south of the South Island, and they're amazing. But you have to book them on the day that they get released because you have to stay in these huts overnight. And so we went. Well, they're only 50 or 60 miles. You don't need to do it in multi-day. You can run them in a day, can't you? And I hadn't done any training for it. I didn't even go run in the mountains. I was 70.3 fit. So I was able to go and do, I mean, yeah, okay. You know, I was doing this with my other half at the time. She's a very good ultra runner. So of course, being a fit guy, I was pretty good in the first half of the day. I was struggling in the second half of the day, that's for sure. But I wasn't trying to be the best ultra distance runner that I could be. I was just enjoying being fit enough to do something like this, and it was an epic couple of days out. But and then you return to recover for a few days and you're back to your 70.3 training. And so I think at an age group level, even to be a good age group, I think there's flex within the year. If you're nearly training hard enough that actually you can go and do whatever you want off very little specific prep and accept that you're doing those other things for the life experience. I guess it depends if you want to broadly perform well across many sports, then you've probably got to train in a more broad sense and therefore you maybe just miss your absolute potential in each of them. But I guess this is, you know, most people aren't winning their age group at Kona. So, and that is 99.99% of triathletes. So, how far down do you have to come there where it's actually like nearly a better experience in endurance sport to be a bit more rounded? And I think most people are making that decision now because they're looking, especially if you get into the sport in middle age, and I'm in mid 40s now, and I know I've got plenty of time left, but I'm also going, there's a lot of cool shit to do out there. How am I going to fit all this in? So, I when I speak to athletes and they come up with, maybe in the past you'd nearly go, "Are you a triathlete? What are you talking about? Going and doing this crazy big adventure race somewhere and etc." But get on with training for triathlon. Now it's, I think people are starting to think more about the overall experience.
100%. I think a nice way to look at this is if you train for 70.3 or thereabouts 90% of the year. And then you plot your year with all this other stuff that you want to get done in the year, then it only takes a little bit of tweaking to your program. Let's say you want to do an Ironman. Okay, well there's probably a couple of months there where you need to step up a little bit of volume, but the base is there. You're still training a good amount.
This is
You want to say
this is this compass model we were talking about earlier, isn't it? 70.3 at the center, step up to Ironman. Yeah, step down to sprint and Olympic. So there's your triathlon in a straight line, and then I guess there's all kinds of tangents off, isn't there?
Exactly that. Exactly that. Maybe you go left and there's some ultra and trail running in there, and a little bit of specific training on that. Maybe you increase the mileage of some of your long runs. Maybe you just do your long run off road for a while. Get in some hills, and then we've got some Hyrox in there.
Oh, I knew it was gonna come up again.
I think it's going to be 2026, the year of Hyrox, isn't it?
No, look, do you know what? I think Hyrox is, it's exploded. It's huge, and we see it. We see it within Total Try now, don't we? That there's people into it, and that is exactly what we like. Good because when I see them on social media, I'm like, they look like they're having fun. And that's got to be the number one reason for doing it all, hasn't it? Like they're having fun doing that. Then they've got a set. And look, I still think let's not have a Hyrox the week before you're doing an Ironman. Hey, let's like plan your year a little bit. And I was talking to a couple of coaches last night actually, and I said, "Have you ever done a Hyrox?" And they went, "No." I said, "Well, you need to do one in the autumn because, it." I consider myself a full sphere endurance coach. I've done most of the endurance sports that any athlete talks about. I've done multiple different lengths of everything. And you feel very rounded, but I've not done a Hyrox. So, look, I don't think it's my bag, but I'm going to go and do one. And I want to understand it. I want to know how it fits in. I want to know a bit more about the training. Because you're going to have athletes that even at the top level, we've seen it with professionals. In their absolute off season, they're just doing Hyrox for fun. It's just another endurance thing to go and do, isn't it? So yeah, I think it definitely has a place now.
So you've heard it here first. This
Yeah,
winter,
yeah. I'll be doing next week's podcast with my top off, obviously. So watch on YouTube. Um,
we'll get
so
banned. Um,
yeah, yeah. No, I think I'm past those days. Yeah, look, I think what we're sort of saying is, you don't need to reinvent yourself to be able to flex in many directions. Um, but absolutely like training multi-sport. We coach some, ultra runners, some quite good ultra runners that use the bike for some cross training. I would probably argue they could do some swimming as well. Even I've as a pure cyclist these days, I've got back into swimming. Makes me feel better, loosens me up, moves me in other directions, and actually just varies my week. I always thought with triathlon that was one of the big appeals is the variety. Absolutely, never bored. It's not like just and I will hold my hand up and go, churning out hundreds of kilometers a week on the road in the UK in the winter. I wouldn't use the word bored, but I think it gets quite taxing at times, to say the least. So, um, yeah. So look, let's talk a little bit about what 70.3 training looks like, and it'll be dead obvious straight away, how that links to all these other sports.
yeah, so this is for most age group athletes. Like, obviously, um, some of you will be doing slightly different, slightly less, slightly more hours perhaps, but trying to get the rough average, and we're looking at what, 8 to 12 hours a week overall volume, something around there. The majority of that made up of steady aerobic work, with maybe one or two higher intensity sessions in there. So we're already forming, the basis of kind of all endurance sport. All we're hitting all the different aspects of fitness. Fitness there. There's maybe one longer endurance session really to pump that aerobic system, put it under a little bit of strain. And then we've got strength training, as we've mentioned several times on this podcast. We definitely try and get our athletes to do one, if not two, solid strength-based sessions during the week.
Just circle back to something you said earlier, actually, that I think we probably glossed past. You said um, if you want to be really good at 70.3, you don't necessarily need strength training. Just elaborate. I don't disagree. Just elaborate.
I, I guess this is my thought, and this is based on personal experience. So let's caveat it with that first of all. And I'm a big proponent of strength training. So let's start it there. But I specifically remember, so I've done strength training all my life. As a youngster, I was thrown in the gym to, well, polish the weights pretty much, but doing something. And I remember during COVID, all the gyms were shut. I know you've seen people doing squats with the partners in the back or filling up buckets of rice. I didn't do any of that. I just didn't do it. I didn't notice a difference in my performance at all. If anything, I was training very, very well during that break. Probably a multitude of factors there. Um, but if we look at the kind of specifics of endurance sport, as long as their strength is at a kind of baseline level, which isn't really that high, we can do the thing that we're trying to do.
Yeah.
Um, Often strength is not the limiting factor here. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think I would. I guess the bit I would say my experience is the same as yours. I definitely I didn't do I back in my very early cycling days when I was much younger. I did quite a lot of strength. I through most of my triathlon career didn't do any. I wasn't injury prone. And I was at an age where, yeah, like you say, could I go to the gym and squat my body weight? Yeah, of course I could. And I did a lot of training volume, and I think that there was an area that I would have improved. I think my run economy would have been better for doing certain type of strength. I don't think I've ridden a bike any better for becoming 30 kilos better at squatting. So yeah, I think it's about that baseline. I think it's different to everyone, and I think also then just considering the way people move. I put an Instagram post out this week about, if I could go back 20 years, there's one thing I'd change, and it would be how I'd work on my running, and that's what I would have probably done with the gym different. I would have made it very run specific. Because I don't think it would have made me a better swimmer and biker as such because of then what maybe I would have lost in the other training. I am a big proponent as a coach of S&C, but I certainly don't dole it out the same to all my athletes. And I do. I've got a guy, and there's obviously these middle distance triathlon rankings now that have just come out, which I think are quite interesting reading to have a look at where you sit from a UK point of view. And I sort of like that the pros and the age groupers are mixed together, which is quite interesting when you're looking at high performers. Obviously, once you sort of pass the 40 mark, there's no pros in there, so it's quite easy to see it from an age group point of view. And the the athlete in question is in his 50s, and I think he's ranked number 4 in the UK. This guy's a builder. He's strong as hell. You can take one look at him and you know he's strong as hell. He doesn't exhibit any requirement for me to start sending in the gym, especially given he's limited to 10 to 13 hours a week of training. His performance, so someone like him, yeah, I don't think it's required. Could he go and do a Hyrox? Absolutely, of course he could. He's lugging stuff around outside, or it's covered already. But the same the other way. I've got athletes that are totally at the opposite end, and I think they really do require the gym for performance gain. So I think it's a unique thing. But I guess the bit is when you're a bit younger, I think there's a bit more flex on it. I think, as I've definitely discovered at my, for the health benefits and how I feel and stuff, using the gym a lot more in my 40s has definitely been beneficial because how I feel affects how I train. So it's not even that the gym itself may be giving the performance gains. And actually, interestingly, I have got quite a lot stronger in the gym this year, and the strength increase in the gym because I think I'm beyond minimum requirement now. It hasn't. That's not what is improving my cycling. It seems to be non-impactful. So I think that's one thing with strength work is um, you, yeah, you don't need to go too far with it.
Yeah, yeah. I look at it quite similarly. I think we both agree on it, to be fair. Um, the reason I always give is endurance sport breaks you down, strength training builds you back up. And that's to do with your stimulus. So endurance sport is catabolic. It tries to take stuff to fuel the performance. Getting in the gym, lift heavy stuff is anabolic. It sends a signal to build, to get stronger in these areas. And the way I look at it, with coaching, you've got responsibility to the athlete. They come to you, they want you to make them better at whatever it is they want to make you better at, whether that's triathlon or ultra running or whatever. Um, but we've got a duty of making sure that they don't leave us in a worse position than when they came. And I think that goes for the whole globe of fitness and health in general. That's the way I look at it. So a little bit of a tangent there, but
Well,
strength
no,
training
it
definitely
probably
should
does
play.
lead on to like the next thing I was going to say there, which is 70.3 fitness. It fits into life, doesn't it? In quite a rounded way. It's not taking your entire weekend out. It's an amount of training that people can get done. And nearly, that like massive volume that's required in an Ironman, for example, really does break the body down. And I think 70.3 probably just by the probably the more varied training stimulus you can build in, the quality of the sessions, um, and maybe actually from a time consumption point of view, once people start training for an Ironman, they're so on the limit of their time availability as an amateur that strength goes out the window. And actually, because I think single sport athletes are much, much better at keeping strength in the plan all year round because, runners, for example, a runner cannot train as much as a cyclist, for example, purely because of the impact involved. Therefore, to do a bit more training, it's beneficial to be in the gym. So, yeah. So how do you sort of why do you think the transfer works so well from 70.3 into these other sports?
I guess you've got the basics right. We work on that aerobic engine that we've spoken about, which is the basis of all endurance sports. Even your Hyrox, um, it's an hour plus event. We have to have a very, very strong aerobic engine, and you training your 8 to 12 hours with the majority of it aerobic, you develop a good aerobic engine because you have to. But equally, during that week, a big focus will be on your threshold tolerance. So, where do those thresholds sit? How are we increasing them? Making sure that they're robust and stable. Training above, training below that threshold. So you've got a good metabolic profile. Um, your thresholds are high and out the way enough for you to do your ultra, and you can clear lactate well enough for you to do your high rocks. Um, on the other side, our muscles are are used to doing a lot of repetitive motion. We get strong. We get develop the ability to endure. It's in the name of it, endurance sport, and that muscular endurance is really, really top notch. And then to top it off, I guess we've got. You said you said earlier that triathlon training isn't boring. I'm sure some people sat in their turbos this winter probably might disagree with that to some extent, but that boredom's never a bad thing. It develops resilience, it develops discipline, it develops creative thought even. We don't fill our time with nonsense. We are mildly focused on a task, and we have to develop that ability for our mind to kind of endure, which again, translates into so many other things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I guess, people listening to this and going, "Yeah, I sort of get it. Training for a 70.3 and being able to flex into other directions. I think for a lot of our athletes, this probably provides some clarity. How do I do all these different things right now? Now I understand. So, and what I'd say is for most people seeking reasonably good performance in a different event to what they're basing, most of their training around, 6 or 8 weeks of specifics, should get you to a fairly good place. If that's an ultra, if that's because as you were saying, everything we're developing all the time keeps the physiology in the place you need it to be. It keeps the psychology in the place you need to be. It's like, the build to a specific triathlon, where you want to become maybe metabolically fit in the right way, or I think maybe if you're flexing into another sport, you just need to gain some experience in that environment, whether that's, running in the mountains, checking your kit, understanding your fueling strategy, etc. And then return to the normal way, the normal way you train. I've seen it. I've seen it at high levels. Coach a guy who very good Ironman athlete. Been right up there at Kona. And last year he just decided he wanted to do an ultra. So he entered 50 mile. I forget which way round it is. Manchester to Liverpool, Liverpool to Manchester. I always get confused. Did he win it? I couldn't remember whether he was first or second, but he went fast. He wasn't too far, of course, record time. Triathlete. We did 6 weeks specifics. At the weekend, we kept the rest of his training looking pretty normal during the week, so that he didn't suddenly get injured because he was chasing massive run volume or something. And had the engine, so delivered. There's a good case at the moment, isn't there, of world tour rider, cyclist, has come over to running this year and has just ran 61 minutes for the half marathon. And he talks quite a lot about, just the size of the engine built doing what he did for his profession for all those years. I think we mentioned this actually in a previous podcast, but it just shows that there's flexibility in it. And I do look at, is this a controversial statement? I do look at a lot of people doing triathlon and wish might be the wrong word. I think I even have over the years tried to show people the door to other avenues. I see it as part of my job. Looking at, I wouldn't do that with someone that's gone this year, I want to be 70.3 world champion. Absolutely stay on track. You haven't got time for messing around. Other people though, the flex in different directions, I think is really important. And I do actively encourage it with a lot of athletes if I think it's going to add to the picture for them.
Yeah, there's a couple of different angles there. There was a number of athletes that Winter Olympics is it finished now?
Yeah.
The last the finish at the weekend.
Yeah, I've got nothing to watch on TV now. I'm a massive winter sports fan. So, I do just want to say, by the way, curling. Right, let's just have this out on the podcast now. The nation goes mad for curling. Right, have you seen how good those other sports are? Yet 5.5 million people tuned in to watch the curling. Curling is crown green bowls on ice. Right, so this is my view, by the way. I'm real cynic on curling. Why has the nation gone wild for curling? No one watches the crown green bowls. You can go and do that in most village greens. Yet hardly anyone's talking about like the women's half pipe final on the skis, which was just mind blowing entertainment. And we're all talking about the curling. Anyway, there's my
I
rant
think
for the week. I've got to get one in there.
I think it's a sport everybody loves to pick on, right? Um, I'm going to go a no comment on that because I'm going to get into trouble if I say anything.
Yeah. You live in the wrong part of the country to start to diss curling, don't you, at the moment? So.
Well, interesting. I used to go to the. I'm going to say something now, aren't I? I used to go to the gym with the curlers. So, all the curlers on the British team, or certainly the vast majority of them are Scottish, and they would train at the Scottish Institute of Sport, as did I, and they often were in the gym at the same time. And I'm just going to say that they trained very, very hard in the gym. That's all I'm going to say. I'm going to leave it at that and move
Really?
swiftly. They trained very, very hard in the gym. Was it necessary? That is my question. But they did it, which kudos to them. They were fit athletes, strong athletes.
Yeah. Anyway, that's the biggest tangent. I'm actually lost. I don't even know what we're talking about now. Anyway,
we're talking about winter sports, and I was going to talk about cross country skiing, because it's probably the most relevant to what we do. But a number of those athletes, firstly, they would have brilliant mountain running careers as well. I think there was one female, for example, that was like world class mountain runner, and also world class cross country ski, and that's because the physiology kind of maps across. And I know for a fact that a lot of the cross country skiers do a lot of running and also do a lot of cycling. Um, and I think there was even talk of one of the guys, like, could he be a world tour rider? With the kind of numbers that you can produce. Obviously, there's a whole skill element, and it's not as simple to kind of map across. But the fitness does map across, and that's the same at the top level, and across kind of every
Yeah, there's
level.
one of the speed skaters, a guy called Nils van der Poel, who I've actually read quite a lot of studies on over the years, some interesting stuff. He's a speed skater, and he's doing something like 30 hours a week of zone two on the bike in his base phase, and then 10 hours a week of threshold work on the bike. And he then only does when he's speed skating, he only skates at race pace because he does everything else in all the other zones as a cyclist, and then speed skates at race pace, and he's the most successful speed skater of all time, I think. Yeah, but very very interesting, and yeah, interesting that at that. I think what's different there is they are strategically using other ways of cross training. I see it with top ultra runners now as well, a lot more use of the bike. Whereas what we're nearly saying is um, find that balance between strategically doing things in other ways to make you a more rounded athlete. And that means a different thing for everybody at amateur level as well, whilst also maximizing all of the opportunities out there to do cool shit. Yeah, and I think I think where we sort of like wanted to like take this from a to round it up. I mean, I'll let you say it. I think it's a statement you like an awful lot. I think it's a big thing for you in your coaching, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess like this is my fundamental belief. Everybody gets into sport. Everybody gets into triathlon for their own reasons. But if we kind of dig down into it a little bit, more often than not, it's about being healthier. It's about challenging themselves mentally. It's about improving at something. And I think this is the kind of real win of this style of training. You're fit for life. You're able to do what you want when you want to do it. Your mates are going to hike at the weekend over some mountains. You can go and do it. I don't know, kids are playing football out the back garden. You've got the ability to go and do it, and you know it gives you that longevity. It gives you that adaptability to do other stuff, and exactly as I said, confidence to just say yes to, as Phil said, do cool shit.
Yeah, fit for life. That is definitely how I personally feel. 70.3 training has left me. That's a win, isn't it? No matter how what level you want to race at, and yeah, it's all about triathlon training then, isn't it? So everyone needs to be a triathlete. Yeah. Look, I think it's in a world where there's lots of opportunity for people to head in different directions. I guess the way I see it, and I really do believe this, is you can head in as many different directions as you want whilst training swim, bike, run, gym. I'm probably even to the point you could be having a year where, well, I'm doing an ultra and I've got this other challenge and this Hyrox. I'm actually not racing a triathlon. I'd probably still train fairly similar.
And
For most
this
people.
is, I know we're kind of just wrapping up there, but um, if we were to do it the opposite way, so we've got a number of events throughout the year, and for the first 3 months we only do high rocks training. For the next 3 months we only do marathon training. For the next three we only do triathlon training. Um, and for the last three, I don't know, pick your thing. You're going to do gravel
An
riding.
ultra.
Uh, where are you going to end up?
Yeah, you're not going to be as good. You'll get better performance out of that more centered approach to training, won't you? For sure. Well, so I
Well,
believe anyway. Yeah,
I'd be fairly confident in putting a bet on that. Yeah.
yeah. So you heard it here. That's the way to train. Grant, thanks for that. That was a good episode, and I still trying to get over the tangent with the curling comment. And anyway, it's out in the world. There's my view on curling. And I've got the same view on cricket, by the way, as well. Anyway, we'll save that for another episode. So yeah, cheers, buddy.
Cheers.